I'm not an inherently superstitious person. And part of that is just knowing about confirmation bias and knowing about the tendency that we have to project and to see what we're looking for and so on. But there is something about finding playing cards on the ground. I have a friend that's really into esoterics or esoterica and tarot card readings and such. And they would freak out every time that I found a card on the ground. Like, which direction was it facing? Which suit? What number? What is it? What is it? What is it? And they have had very significant life events seemingly predicted by finding playing cards on the ground, which is really odd in and of itself. Like, who is dropping playing cards? Like, in the Calgary area, like, somebody is dropping playing cards on the ground, and it's making us all schizophrenic. Because I remember I found a Joker card. Now, I knew it came from a casino because it was punched. And that Joker card, I mean, again, you see what you want to see, I suppose. But it did precede a very interesting event that was seemingly portended by finding this card. And I know that at the end of January this year, I found a 3 of hearts in the ground. And it was an odd circumstance, too, because the world had sort of thawed in a kind of in a chinook, and here's this 3 of hearts just laying on the ground. And I don't really know. Like, I don't know for how long or how much to read into it, but I always find it interesting. Now, in this conversation, I know that I've psychoanalyzed the person, the relationship, and the state. And it is a fair question, not even an accusation, a question about, well, do you ever turn the lens on yourself? Like, is this just an experiment where you are observing people like rats, like bugs in a bell jar, so to speak? Do you ever turn it on yourself? Do you ever psychoanalyze because you wish to be the one in charge and you're trying to figure out the tools of domination for that end? And yeah, it is a fair point, actually. And it's funny because I actually really don't have any problem revealing biographical data, just because there's this thing that, I mean, young men are prone to, where you're in a public space and you're like, oh, these people are fucking slugs. They don't have the interiority that I have. They don't think as deeply as I do. And it really is, everyone has got the same hierarchy of needs and the same incentives and all the same puzzle pieces that fit together. And I think the only difference is that some people know they're there and some people they know that they don't know that they're there. And for me, I don't really have any shame about it because I just realize that we're all the same. And so the issue with me and why I'm into this. So I grew up in a fairly chaotic environment. So bad house, bullying in school, horrible teachers that would use like adult rhetoric against a child and sort of psyop and don't like torture into compliance. And then I always had this feeling that I wasn't really connecting with people. So I felt fundamentally out of phase. This is like as I go into junior high and high school, like in adolescence. Like I just didn't feel like I was meeting people in any particular way. So I would talk to them and I felt all they heard was static, and they talked to me and all they heard was static. And there's this very overwhelming feeling that there was a conversation that wasn't happening that should have. Like I never felt like I was really having the deep conversation with people. Like maybe in moments, I had a lot of friends where I would ask them, like, well, so like, what are your anxieties? Like what keeps you up at night? Like, are you happy? Why are you happy? And a lot of people would just be like, no, I'm perfectly fine. There's nothing in there. I'm just perfectly fine. And I would see that now as maybe repression. I would see that as people don't want to face the shadow because it has a potential to destroy you and to destroy relationships and cause a lot of very hectic things to happen in your life. So I can understand why they wouldn't want that. So I'll talk a lot about avoidant attachment, which is the idea that you start off trusting people and loving them, and then there's a betrayal, and then you're forever mixing love with the feeling of betrayal. So you're drawn to people, you get in deep with them, and then all of a sudden the alarm bells go off. And it feels a lot like right before you were to be betrayed last time, and then you back off. And so there's this constant push-pull oscillation. And I think for me, it more tends towards what would be considered the anxious attachment type, where I've had to predict the moods of people over top of me. So teachers, parents, and like other kids bullying me. So they had chaotic, abusive behaviors in some circumstances. So I always had to get ahead of that. And you begin to model people, and you begin to pay very close attention. You try to figure out the ways that they work. And now it starts off very intuitive, like much in the way that people used to think that the wind was spirits in the leaves or something. It starts off very intuitive, and then once you begin to learn the theory more and more and more, then you start to develop better models and better predictions. And it goes all the way, like from the individual, like knowing how you self-sabotage, figuring out yourself so that you can preempt your own moods, your own anxieties, your own depression, whatever it is. And then within relationships to know like, oh, is this when they're going to finally leave me? And also how can what can I emanate that they don't leave me, that they don't grow tired of me, that they don't turn on me? And then with parents and authority figures, again, like the capricious moods, the teachers, like what about them? And believe me or not, but when I was a kid experiencing these adults and authority figures being angry at me and overriding me and overwhelming me and coming at me with, what I understood to be cruelty even when I was young. And the worst part about it is that you tend to take responsibility for the emotions of authority figures, because if you doubt them when you're that young and vulnerable, that is you basically saying the one thing that is a barrier between me and everything that I fear is wrong. Well, then you have to face the world by yourself. And so you have an instinct to always have these explanatory narratives whenever an authority figure or a parent or a teacher or whatever is really coming down on you. And I just remember at the time that even then I had the sense like if I'm ever in the position where I'm in where it's inverted, I am never going to make anybody feel this helpless. I can't do it. Like the spike there. I mean, I suppose in one sense, trauma is very instructive in the sense that now when I try to have empathy for people, I think, what am I actually making them feel in these conversations? And I want to transmit that responsibility and feeling to other people, even if it is troubling to understand when you first hear it. And thinking about those issues when I would not be able to speak to people or not be able to meet them or feel like the conversation was actually happening. Well, I mean, that too, like I never want to give that feeling of helplessness to someone else. But at the same time, I want to be able to help people communicate in a way that feeling of helplessness no longer needs to necessarily be propagated. That not everything being revealed or put on the table immediately, because that's not correct, but at least to have a sort of procedure, a sort of a system of manners, almost like a system in which people can bid and respond in a certain way where if there is trust to be built, it can be done so much like how, to build something like the Eiffel Tower or whatever, there are all of these underlying technologies to actually building something. It's a matter of steel and fastener strengths and standards and bolt shear strength and all these kinds of things. And it's kind of the difference between like a Tower of Babel and the Empire State Building. It's just, to build the thing does presume that it needs to be built, that people actually want to build it. But it can only be built once people have the tools to do so. And that is essentially what all these monologues really ultimately serve. So it starts off as an inherently defensive posture. And then when it comes to the government, obviously you understand the nature of the state, so you understand the vectors of attack, like what sort of tactics that they'll use against you, and when can you see the shifting signs? And it's all a matter of hypervigilance. But for me, I don't think I really have that. I don't really have that thing where people get too close and then I have to push them away. If anything, people get close and I'm like, well, how do I keep them there? that is the original wound, so to speak. And everyone has some shade of this, and it's just a matter of how well that you integrate it. Because, in the useful Jungian, there is the idea of you've got the persona and you've got the shadow, and then you've got the consciousness that is made in the tension between the two. And understanding that this is your shadow, if you're avoidant, you understand that you have the tendency to push people away. And if you're anxious, you have the tendency to sort of fix people in place. And with the anxious attachment, you start off fairly innocent because you're in low leverage situations as a child. But when you finally have leverage over people, like if they love you, for instance, like you've got like girlfriends and wives and children, then it can morph into control, because now you're using your ability to understand people and predict behavior to reverse engineer that and to begin to engineer behavior and to engineer attachment and to make it so that no one has, like, people are scrambled and they have no idea. Like you're just always magically right ahead of every time that they have an independent thought, or they have something against you, or they begin to individuate and differentiate themselves from you, or they change in some particular way, and you can preempt that, and you can say, you can gaslight them out of that change so that they never change. And so the integration is to look at that shadow and know that you've got that fear, but you can't make other people responsible for it. And to also take those skills and to use it for something good, which is to actually get closer to people, ironically. And that just comes to, like, if you love someone, you have to go fairly deep. Like, the more that you know of someone and the more that there is entwined trust, then that is the deeper that the love gets. So if you've got the ability to understand people and you've got the ability to really have a good think about who they are and what they're about, that can be turned into something that is reverent for the person. But you always have to remember to understand that you can't overwrite them. And I speak of that third thing between people. You only have the ability to author yourself and what you make with other people. And so it is to understand that the skills and the insight, and if you happen to have a talent for it, great, but the skills and the insight have to stop at a certain place, and that is the boundary of sovereignty. So psychoanalysis and intuition and being able to read people, like any skill, it has to be bound and bonded by a very strong sense of ethics. And so a lot of the reasons that I develop and care a lot about ethics is because, one, I know that I have the skills and the potential tendency to do this. And I would take one to protect myself from essentially gaslighting myself and manipulating myself, as odd as that sounds, but that's what people do, and others. And then also to use that to prevent the same overwriting from other institutions on the innocent individual. So the state, the relationship, the dysfunctional family. And so that's the idea. Like, and I'm very candid about flaws, because everyone is going to have flaws. And it is a matter of integration. That is how you save yourself and save the world. It's a bit odd meeting me, I'll say that much. I ask very deep questions, and if you give me something, I always come back with something that, like, you can tell that I've thought a lot about it. And I'm infinitely curious about people. Like, the information, like, I suppose people are I remember them like, if you've ever been in a public space and you see the paint worn off in a certain part of a railing where everyone's touched, or like part of like a gym floor where everybody seems to step in that one place, or like found out this where they've paved but everyone's sort of looped around. There is just something about how people are meant to be sort of living impressions, and there has to be reverence for the fact that they're a process that is operating in a continuum, and you must never freeze them in place. And you must never think that you've figured them out. I mean, to understand somebody is to also understand that they change, and you have to be open to surprise. But it is interesting too, because so in one way you can freeze people in place is to lock them into a certain sort of photograph. a momentary image that is inherently flat because, well, it's a photograph. But the other way to do it is to essentially not give them any information or feedback, or give them any information, or to challenge them even slightly, because that also locks them in place. People only grow by challenge and feedback and facing the world, and you are part of the world, and you're the most significant part of the world in a lot of circumstances to those people. And if you don't challenge, and if you don't speak truth, then that in and of itself is sort of an act of violence by omission, in the sense that you see something happening and you don't have an opinion on it. And that is why when it comes to debate, just the matter of good faith versus bad faith, relationships ought to always be good faith. You shouldn't be speaking to somebody in order to win or to gain something. You have to think very deeply about what you're actually trying to do with what you're saying. Like, does it need to be said now? Does it need to be said like this? Is this the best venue for it? Am I saying this in anger? Like, you really have to think about what you're saying when you talk to people, because these offhand comments really do live in people's memories. And there is something too, like in conversation, I know that if somebody confesses something very deep to you, and this is the problem that I have had to work with, to not immediately try to solve the thing with practical advice. And I know, like with women, it seems to be they need to get the emotions out, and they need to let those breathe in the air and hear it in order to integrate it. It's like it's a secondary path where you develop new things by simply saying the thing out loud. And then with men, it just appears to be more about running tape and just talking about all their solutions and all their problems out loud, but it seems to be more pragmatically based. But the thing is like, you have to remember that, and obviously there's a gradient between the two, but I found that with men, you can't do the thing where you immediately try to solve the problem either. You have to allow them to actually speak it into the air and actually reveal it in conversation so that they can think about it better, and then you step in. So it's just the first strategy that I always have when people are actually confessing things is to take sort of the therapist's tact and just let it breathe. And there is something too about when I think about how a lot of my psyche and a lot of the ways that I deal in the world seems to be born of, I've seen so much of the shadow of life and experienced a lot of pain and a lot of tumultuous points, and have been pretty low in a lot of points simply because of the way that I was brought up and the way that I've experienced the world. And I always tend to wonder, like, I mean, I've got friends and even siblings that have seemed to just sort of sidestep all of the challenges and just have somehow, and I actually have asked them, and I really don't think that they're repressed. I think they found a way to game the system and just know that a lot of life is about ticking boxes. And a lot of violent and oppressive entities are quite satisfied if you just game the system a little bit. And they seem to have gone through life without too much trauma. And again, I've asked them. I'm not just assuming. And so with me, it's would I choose this again? And I think yes. I think that in order to have a good outside view of the world, you have to be cast off from it, and you have to be able to view it from far. And it is one of those questions where it's just like, how many angels can dance in the head of the pin? Like, can God microwave a burrito so hot that even he himself cannot eat it, right? Like, it's an unknowable question, but I just have this inkling that yes, I would have preferred to have had this life on the outside where I've had to look in, and to have this talent and proclivity to analyze and to look into systems and to operate in that field. It's just, there's something, I just have a sense. That's all I can really say about it. It's like, I think I would still rather go through it exactly like this. But it's because I think that all of the beautiful things in life in the world become more beautiful and become more edifying and become more glorious the deeper that you've been into the shadow. So I think that I would just like to see the absolute depths so that when the sun finally shines in me, I appreciate it all the more. It like as a matter of contrast. It's that thought experiment about heaven, in the sense that if you get everything that you want all the time, you eventually become dejected and nihilistic because there's no stakes. It's just everything you want all the time. If you don't feel that contrast, like you don't love the warmth of a fire unless you've been in a blizzard. It's as simple as that. So I think to maximize happiness and beauty in the world, there needs to be an attending shadow to it. And so when I talk about conflict and debate and relation, I mean, it's just sort of this idea about, okay, so you found love and then what? Because love is not just something that you get and then it's a box checked. It's a continuous process, and very famously, it's a response to virtue, in the sense that you see somebody that exemplifies all of the beautiful things in the world that you could ever think of, and everything that has you wake up in the morning, everything that animates your motivation to do better, and it's a matter of maintaining that in a way. And so when it comes to the sort of negotiations in relationships, there is clearly this line between good faith and bad faith, where, I mean, if you've ever gotten into arguments online, and I mean, I've been doing this since I was like 12, where you can tell that people are only absorbing your points as a way to throw them back at you in the worst interpretation possible. There's no magnanimity in it at all. They're literally just trying to win. And one of the insights that I started to develop was like, okay, you've won, but what have you won exactly? So there's two people that are now mad at each other and doubt themselves and have put a great amount of effort into solving essentially nothing. Now, there is this idea that when you're having a debate, you're not debating to convince the other person of your point. What you're debating for is the people that are in the audience that happen to stumble upon this conversation, and you presented your points, and then it is the audience that ultimately chooses the winner. And it's ultimately the audience that is won by observing this batonnage of opinions and ideas going back and forth between people. But the thing is that in intimate relationships, and I mean, this is even like in professional relationships. Like I had a boss once where there was some other party, and big conflict with them, and I just asked them, just like, do you ever wonder, like, so why do they do this? Why are they like this? Like, what exactly is going on behind what they're doing? And it's just like, why the fuck would I care? And I mean, there is something to be said about thinking about other people's motivations, the counterparty's motivations. But when you're in these relationships, there is no audience. It's just between two people. And so it is a matter of understanding good faith debate, which is having humility to understand that even when people are saying terrible things to you, that, I mean, there is always intelligence and sort of the shadow of virtue revealed by how people argue with you. So one, you can always tell the way that they're brought up by just their rhetorical features. Like when they want to wound you, they know exactly how to wound you. So this happened a while ago. I mean, this is like 18, 19, like at a high school. And I had a girlfriend. I don't smoke, but I was smoking one at a party, and she just walked past me and said, "You're holding that like a very bad word." And like there is some, when you think about how deeply somebody is trying to wound you, in and of itself, that reveals that you've got emotional weight in them, in their sophistry and their abusive behavior. They even in that they reveal love, at least in its shadow, in that they've really thought intensely about you and what your values are. And if someone is trying to wound you in this kind of, I think this was like an avoidant detachment kind of thing. And, you know, we're still friends, and like, I don't take it seriously. In the sense that I don't think that she really meant it. I mean, I know why she had to say it, and we've discussed it, but within that, it just revealed that, like, yes, I mean, even in the worst things, people are showing you that they care. And you can recognize intelligence and depth even in that. Because, you know, relationships are not just everything is great all the time. And in fact, you know, there's a very classic thing where, like, you know, a couple is going to divorce when they just stop having arguments with one another, because that means that there's no emotions anymore. There's nothing is on the table. Like there's no reason to really get mad because they both sort of walled themselves off and they're just sort of waiting for the opportunity to end the thing. But at the same time, you have to remember that substantial debate, I mean, there's this thing where like you're obviously, like your family ultimately are the people that will visit you in the hospital. Like even my best friends, I'm still like, I'm kind of 50-50 on visiting you in the hospital. Like it's just because that's why you have a wife and that's why you have girlfriends and that's why you have mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and all that. Like but at the same time, like those are the people that you tend to fight with the most. Like many people have had this, well, everybody has this experience of like you getting screamed at and then a stranger comes along and like, oh, everybody's happy. Although this person was incredibly mad at you and screaming at you, all of a sudden they can clean up immediately for an unimportant person. And so you have this temptation to be the hardest on the people that you're around. And I mean, that seems to be more of a confession of emotional weight and emotional depth. Even in how horrifying it is to experience. So it's not a matter of getting rid of conflict. That's a very bad sign, but it's just being able to arrange it in a way where it's generative rather than destructive. And the way that you do that is you really have to unlearn a lot of the ways that you debate with people, in the sense that you can't be in there to win. You actually have to be curious. Like if you're having a conflict with somebody and you're not asking any questions and you're not trying to understand their point of view, that's when you run into trouble because that is your architecture clashing with theirs. You're not trying to find the third thing between the two of you where you're actually building something. Because ultimately, if you think about love and this third thing as something that you're building together, which is the combination of like all of your will and spirit, so to speak, you would want to put the best thing forward. You'd have to treat another person like yourself, which is where empathy comes in. Now, empathy is understanding or trying to model the other person, so if we go back to psychoanalysis and how that can turn deadly, but at the same time, empathy is psychoanalysis. It is trying to understand their motivation and their point of view. And in good faith conflict resolution and good faith building, you have to be able to psychoanalyze the other person. You have to think, where do they come from? Why do they do what they do? What are their fears? And how can you meet those correctly? That is what good faith debate is. And then when it comes to yourself, it is a matter of psychoanalyzing yourself so that you understand why you do what you do. When it comes to partners, it's the same thing. And then when it comes to the polis, I mean, that's just a matter of trying to strip away tribalism and try to figure out why people are engaging the ways that they do. Like when I talk about communists and socialists having this sort of familial wound where they're trying to recreate a childhood that they couldn't have, where they're actually, loved and cared for in an unconditional way. That is not to say that these people are spiritually immature and can never be rehabilitated, but it's more that I can't just shout at these folks about markets, and I can't translate my love of spontaneous order and freedom to somebody who is inherently incapable of it for now. And so when it comes to reaching across the aisle and extending a hand, I mean, yes, psychoanalysis can be made to wound and flatten people, but like everything, a scythe it can feed, but it can also kill. Like the tools themselves are morally neutral. And again, when I just talk about psychoanalysis, I'm saying it's neutral. It has to be bound by ethics. And so that's the same thing with debate. That is the same thing with discussion, it is a morally neutral tool that needs to be bound by ethics. And when I talk about good faith debate, there's also this idea of empathy is also the steel man. So in bad faith debates, what you try to do is you create what's like a straw man. So like a fake and easily destroyed version of their argument. That's what a straw man is. So if you're having a debate about, capitalism versus socialism, and the socialist is like, well, you just want people to die in the streets without health care. That is a straw man position. Just like you just want money to rule everything. And the steelman position would be like, well, no, but you want money to be strong. And obviously if this is a socialist debating me, they'd be like, if they were steelmanning my position in good faith, they would think, well, okay, I understand that money is used for bad things, but I suppose money is a neutral tool. So please explain to me why we shouldn't have a central bank, why we should leave it up to the market to create money. Like that kind of thing. And with socialism, I mean, it's about acknowledging the fact, like, listen, I understand, like, I know that you care deeply about other people and you see people suffering in the system, and you're merely looking for solutions to why people are dying and why people are upset. And I have a certain perspective, like there's a certain set of epistemic tools that I have where I can see why the scene is not always what's actually happening. And I understand where you're coming from. I know when somebody is a good faith statist, because that's just all that they sort of know. They're a fish that doesn't know what water is. And they're just like me. And they develop heuristics and they have intuitions, and if they're open to it, my showing my cards and actually letting them see exactly how that I'm thinking, because that's the thing, is like, if you know better and if you've got more experience, it is up to you to be the more magnanimous one in a conflict, and actually just volunteer more of yourself, like stick your neck out so that you can actually lead by example, so to speak. It is sort of like the 4-minute mile, and it is taking over the learned helplessness that people have, in the sense that they don't engage in good faith debate because they've never actually had good faith debate modeled for them. I mean, not in their family, not in their schools, not even in the political sphere. Like, a lot of people, I mean, I think to have a good faith debate is to be loving, and people just have not experienced love. A lot of people have just never experienced that. And there is something to be said about life experience. The first thing that I'll say is just, when it comes, like, I'll never do this thing where I'll be talking to somebody younger and it's like, you're just 16, like, you'll figure it out eventually, like, don't worry about it. And there's not this demarcation where a person is just in life at some point. It's just like, no, you speak to them as though they're in it. Like, you're already in the process. Consciously, I feel no different than I did at 16. And I can't approach somebody with the idea that, there's just going to be these punctuated moments. You know, you're going to go to work and then you're going to learn all these things and then you're going to get rearranged. And that's not the way that it happens. Like, I've never given a shit about age or life experience necessarily. You always have to show your work. Because I learned this very early on, that people will be 30 and 50 and 70, and all that their age tells you is that they potentially have been doing the wrong thing for decades. There is no inherent rightness about it. Like, sort of in therapy, there's this idea about how if you have an anxious thought or there's somebody saying something to you, to just remember that it's a voice. It is not the be-all, end-all. It is a voice for consideration. And so when somebody tells you, like, well, I've been around and I've had all these experiences, okay, well, can you show your work? Can you show me how those life experiences have actually translated into knowledge that is necessary in this conversation? So I want you to tell me the specific life experience and the chain of reasoning that allows you to challenge mine on the basis of life experience. Because, like, say that you've been a plumber for 50 years. I mean, when you think about it, all a plumber really sees water as is either sewage or fresh water. There's not a lot of nuance in there. It's if you're doing a job and it's your life, so to speak, you can't always draw analogies to it because those are very limited experiences. You can be very good at them, but not everything is necessarily translatable. It's the same thing, I suppose, too, with like CEOs versus employees. And even I have this idea where I'm not the guy that started the business. I'm not the CEO, right? So there's always this idea about, I can't challenge the CEO because I'm just this pissant employee. I'm presumptuous. But at the same time, again, a company is a living organism, and the CEO is not running the show by himself. It is always a matter of the division of labor and he's hired other people and he relies on people on the bottom giving him information and doing the work for him under his direction. And so as long as I can work out, as long as I can show the work, so if I come with a proposal that has empathy for his position, in the sense that, limited resources, institutional inertia, regulations, as long as I just show my work and then realize and treat him as though he's got empathy for looking at my position correctly, there's no reason to have this arbitrary demarcation where like I employee, he's CEO. It's just all about hoping and acting as though he's going to work in good faith and working in good faith myself. And it's also this idea of you just approach people with benefits. Like, not only have I done the work ahead of time, but I'm just trying to make it mutually beneficial for both of us. You have to sell them on the idea that, like, yes, following my proposal will work for you, it'll work for me, and it working for me will make things better for everybody. I've had the shadow of that too, where this, like the boss, so to speak, will make a straw man of me, and they'll think, and this is a very common thing where they think that if you disagree and you have pushback, well, they automatically fix you in this position of, this is Mr. Pushback. He is always going to disagree with everything that I have. Now, one, you would want to have someone that's disagreeing with you because yes men are the death knell of power. If somebody always agrees with you, that doesn't make any sense. That's not the way that life works. That's not the way that it worked when you were smaller, and that's not the way that it works when you're bigger. As well, you don't have empathy for the fact that an employee potentially does want the company that he works for to be better and to have better business. And he's doing this not out of control. And that is always a suspicion. Some people are just inherently negative and controlling and will give bad ideas simply because they're their ideas. It is a matter to reassert control, which is a bad faith debate tactic. It is a bad faith conflict tactic. So it is just a matter of empathy. And I realize that too, like when it comes to the friends that I choose and who interests me the most, like I remember my best friend, the first conversation that I had with him was, he was a vegan at the time, thankfully not anymore. He's very much red-blooded now. But he was talking about being vegan. I looked at his shoes and I was like, oh, those are leather. And he's like, oh yeah, man, that's the one compromise you got to make. No, there is no vegan material that can make a good shoe. And, if you think about like, what is it that made this guy my best friend? Well, it's because, think about the fact, like it's a vegan that's being challenged on something. He has to have that initial understanding that, oh, this is a good faith conversation. This is somebody trying to reach out to me. And, per my anxious attachment thing, like there's me going really deep because veganism is obviously something very important to a lot of people. It's really strange. Like the two like really beautiful Irish girls that I've met in my life, they were both vegan, and it was both of it was a deal breaker. And I just remember like having the conversation about it, and one of them was just really like, would you ever consider going vegan? And I was like, I can't, sorry. It's got to be pure horse blood thundering through my veins. I am sorry. And I don't know. It's just, I don't know why the Irish, I just give her back the rosary so she can have a hamburger. I don't know. But anyway, so it's a very significant moral and ethical thing to him. And yet I'm challenging it implicitly. Like I'm pointing out that he's a hypocrite and this is a contradiction and you're just a phony piece of shit and how dare you. But no, he understood exactly the question, and which is really funny because this is a very, very passionate fella. He definitely screams a lot more than I do in conversation. And when he gets going, Like if when I talk about people send me like very long messages and, feedback to these, he's one of the ones, and I appreciate every word of it. But here he is. He understands that, like, yes, but he explains himself. Like he's showing his cards, and he's taking the risk that I'm actually doing it in good faith. And like that is where you meet people. And it's funny too because even if people tend to be withholding or hold their cards really close to their chest, so to speak, there is just, or even if they actually intentionally try to wound me, or if they test me with like vicious or confronting things, and they don't reveal a lot about themselves and all that stuff. Even within that, there's depth and intelligence that is revealed in those conversations, where it's almost like, yes, I see a very, very long shadow cast, which I know means that there is tremendous potential to have hope in with those people, and that is where I'll volunteer endless amounts of effort to reach them. So there is always something about that. Like, I know that I've got a deep shadow, which I turned into something good, and I have that faith in other people that eventually they can meet me somewhere. And there's this lived experience paradox where, at once people can say, you don't know me. But then when you get to know them too much, then there's sort of the accusation of presumption, which, I mean, fair. I always grant people their defenses. And I know that, I mean, I don't know the meaning of life, but I know the shape of life. And I would always just consider it to be a matter of tension. It's like the idea between like idealism and materialism, light and shadow. It's just, even again with the Jungian conception of just like persona, shadow, the consciousness is that tension in between the two. It's just that, like, you're never going to be in a position of peace in life. I mean, even when things are going very well, you're always animated with this adrenaline of potential and doing something. It's this beautiful thing that I would never run from. I don't want to be at peace, because peace is almost like death. The analogy that I can think of for how I think about life, I suppose, is, if you think about a pocket watch, and I mean, this is the big thing about, I don't know if it's a creation atheist thing about finding a pocket watch in the forest. Never understood it. I've never looked into it. I just know people are obsessed with pocket watches. But for me, if you think about the actual construction of the thing, so the mainspring is just like this, it's this wound piece of spring steel that'll pop out and like take your eye out if you open it incorrectly. And it's got sharp edges and it'll lacerate you and all that. And in a watch, it is, through all these genius mechanical mechanisms, it's turned into this sinusoid of like light and shadow and ticking. And it takes like this chaotic, instantaneous force, and it makes it allows it to tick in a way that is useful, and in a way that is predictable, and in a way that the things that are facilitated by time, like, so I won't go into the whole thing, but basically oceanic navigation does not happen unless you have a chronometer, like a timepiece that can actually locate yourself on a map. Like, you measure your speed and then you measure the time, and you can look at the stars and triangulate, and even without stars. But the whole point is, like, oceanic navigation, the success rate was orders of magnitude by something as simple as, like, just like an automatic mechanical watch in your hand. That is something that was, I mean, that is like the invention of clean water and vaccines and like semiconductors. Like, in terms of what that did for expanding world and technological process, the simple watch, like, I wouldn't say worship it, but just have reverence for the fact that, like, this is a piece of technology that changed the course of human history tremendously. And I think back to this memory of, like, my fourth grade teacher talking about leaving alarm clocks in the cribs and beds of puppies and infants to sort of imitate the heartbeat of the mother. And I mean, I thought, your typical mechanical alarm clock will tick at, I think, 120 beats per minute, so 2 beats every 2 beats every second. And then it's like, I thought, well, wouldn't that just make the baby or the puppy anxious because it thinks the mother is in a panic? I don't know. But it's just, I don't know. It's the memory comes to me whenever I talk about pocket watches, and it's a very, very deep one. But that's just the whole idea about, like, society and language and everything that we're doing is just essentially taking this lifetime and this potential energy and actually using our intelligence and our organizing force to, like, turn this chaotic thing into something that is beautiful and consistent and facilitating just the most beautiful things. Because, I mean, every beautiful thing needs a venue. Every society needs a city. Every lover needs a forest, And I realized too, like, there is, when it comes to male friendships, I mean, there's kind of this tension when, like, yes, like, we've needed to hunt mammoths together, and we needed to build together. But I do find it kind of funny how like we're always in competition for women. So it's like, yes, it's iron sharpening iron, but at the same time, there's sort of like this implicit threat, like, yes, I will stack your bodies to reach Rapunzel in her tower. But again, it's a tension that you have to hold and navigate and turn into something useful, because we can't just be fighting with each other all the time. We have to make some concession to like the greater good in society, which, I mean, sadly is something that we probably won't realize. We won't miss our water until it's gone, so to speak. And yeah, when I think about school and that idea of never reaching people, and I just think about when I had to read Catcher in the Rye. I mean, one, I was kind of fascinated because there's this Mel Gibson movie called Conspiracy Theory. And basically he's like a Manchurian candidate. He's like a sleeper activated by phrases or whatever. I forget what they call those things. Like a Project Monarch, I think. And the whole idea was like, he was like a secret assassin and, and he's a conspiracy theorist, but, for good reason, because he literally was programmed by like a CIA whatever in the movie. But I know that there was something about A Catcher in the Rye being like a book that he would constantly like compulsively buy copies of. And I think that it was a reference to Mark David Chapman, who was also obsessed with the book. But so I read it in like the 11th grade, and I swear I just like, are you people just fucking making fun of me? Because like this is my life, man. Like, what are you doing? Like, is this? It's like someone's drawn a caricature of you. It's like, yes, I do. Yes, I met the girl at the football game, and yeah, and everyone's a phony, and I can like. And the book and it has no conclusion. I think he ends up in a mental ward. I mean, I remember laughing out loud at him talking about the atom bomb and how he would sit on it and set it off. But honestly, what was the point of this nihilistic drivel? Like, give me like it's. I think it's almost like they need to take away the hero's journey from young men. So they give them this book about like, yeah, you're unhappy and then you end up in a nut house or whatever. Like, okay, beautiful. I mean, I know that it was the first book that was like a realistic portrayal, blah, blah, blah. But like, why don't you have me read an autobiography of somebody if you want to give me a realistic portrayal? Don't make my myth to be a nihilistic shithole where I can just, but I mean, I quite identify with the fact that like, obviously he felt that people were phony and they're withholding things from him. And, the whole thing about Catcher in the Rye is like, it's sort of like this childish sense of, and I don't mean childish in the pejorative sense, like this childish sense of play where like you catch another person in the rye. Like, I think it was a reference to like his sister going into adulthood and like she was an innocent sort of present person and he was trying to save her from adulthood and all of the clamping down that people do when they become adults. Which, I mean, if we talk about psychoanalysis and love and all that, I mean, it is one of those things where you're trying to find your humanity again in this swirling world of chaos. So it's sort of like it's a half-formed thought. There should be a second part to that book. And something kind of odd, too, was there's fairly consistent themes in music, but there's this song called 3:10 to Yuma. And I think it was written for a Western, but I know Sandy Denny did a cover of it. And essentially, it's just like it goes into like how a man has 4 seasons in his life, where he's like planting and then he cultivates and all of that. And, the winter rains come down on him and the wind and all that. And then Yuma is like this desert. And it's talked about as it's a place where there's no seasons. And they represent death as something to be where there are no seasons. And I thought that was a very interesting way to talk about it. Like the desolation is because it's like death is not disappearance of life necessarily. It's the disappearance of change. And something when I'm thinking about music, I did notice that most of the songs that I referenced in the earlier podcast they're all sort of like pre-1980s. Now, there's this whole thing about what happened to music. So some of it gets a bit technical. Like there's this thing called compression, which is essentially you make the quiet parts louder and the louder parts quieter. And what that is it's a way of like when music gets quieter, you tend to lean in. And when it gets louder, it's that contrast that allows you to have crescendo. And I think that they didn't want audiences to have to rely. They didn't want to have to rely on audiences, rather, on finding a quiet place to listen to music and to actually make it a ritualistic thing where they can feel it, because music was more turned into like a mass consumption product, I suppose. So they had to make it very smooth and have a very consistent volume. And ironically, like on these podcasts, I apply compression because there's always a chance that you're like vacuuming or you've got ambient noise. So it actually makes sense to have like the light and shadow and the volume of my voice change, or not change rather, so that it's always a continuous flow of words. Because if you're reading a book, your inner voice is always the same volume. Hopefully that you have an inner voice. Some people don't. So it makes sense for that medium. It's the same thing with like radio broadcasts of speech. You want that compression, but with music, you absolutely need contrast, and you need dynamics, and you need atmosphere. And one of the reasons that music sounds so phony, like if you turn on just like a radio, or you listen to whatever garbage Spotify has on like its default top 40, you'll notice that there's no variation in the volume of songs, but also that there's kind of like this like whiplash effect where the compression and the hard limiting is jostling the sound louder at each point. And I'm very sensitive to this kind of thing, and I can't really enjoy music where I feel that it's been artificially processed into sludge, because it feels desperate. And even that too, like the composition, like there's no real slow intros. Like the classic example of this is Stairway to Heaven, where I don't think that the drums even start until 4 minutes and 50 seconds into the song or something like that. So it's just like this very like, there's a soft intro and movement. It's like operatic. And then it starts to get heavier and heavier and heavier, and actually ends on a high note, which was compositionally, like that's not very Baroque. And so when I listen to music, like modern music, I don't really feel it, because there's something to the songwriting too, where they try to force an opinion. You know, it's sort of like it's like they're trying to force a emotion on you, and they're dictating the terms too much, because like music is supposed to be sort of a Rorschach test, in the sense that it reveals parts of you that you're not necessarily in touch with, because it shows you the image and then it lets your brain sort of auto-complete the picture. This sort of in-betweenness of music. And then when it's too in your face, like, I mean, I think about Mumford and Sons, and it's just like, you're broken up with your girlfriend, you're very upset, time for your medicine, piggy, stomp, clap, you are sad. It's like, no, you can't do that. You contrast that with like an Eagles song, just like, just another tequila sunrise. Like it's a story about other people, but you project yourself into the situation. And I don't like being messed with. It seems like bad faith. It seems like it's trying to inscribe something on me, and I've never really felt it. And so with old music, it's not that I think that society has turned to shit and like old things are necessarily better. It's just all of the things that actually make music worth listening to are sort of accidentally inherent in older music, simply because they hadn't perfected the consumer aspect of it. I mean, what's interesting is like a lot of the people that listened to really good records back in the day, if you look at what they listen to now, they listen to pure sludge. Like it's a very classic thing with the baby boomers, where they have like, you know, Jefferson Airplane and like the Eagles and, you know, the Grateful Dead and like Paul Simon and all that stuff. Like it just this whole plethora of very, you know, they had like Abbey Road and they had Pet Sounds. And then what are they watching? Like American Idol or The Voice or something. And you're like, oh, okay. So this was not a grassroots thing. This was like elite artists who really loved their craft, filling that void for a while. But then the production just sort of realized that people don't really care what they're listening to. Now, a select few do. And obviously, people are still making good music. I mean, even me with this, like, I always record these in stereo on, like, a really good recorder. You may notice that, like, there's kind of that Cheshire Cat thing where, like, ooh, am I over here? Am I over here? Because this is a stereo recorder, so there's more depth to my voice. And, you know, I'm taking all these measures to take all the echoes out of this room and so on. And it's because audio quality is incredibly important. And like depth and sound, like if you can make a good recording, you can make a really good recording. And you know, they did this in the 60s too, where like if you listen, like, so there's these demos that Buddy Holly did when he lived in New York City in like 1960, and they sound like they were recorded today because it's just a tape recorder, a very good one, but not without a bunch of echo on it and a bunch of reverb. Now, if you listen to like the Ronettes, Be My Baby or something like that, like one of those things that Phil Spector did, where he just like took everything and like just projected it down a fucking drain pipe so that everything sounds like you're in the middle of like a grain silo when you're listening to this. We have this impression that fidelity was not that good, but it actually really was. And yeah, there's just something to be said about fidelity. And, you know, going back to this thing about good faith versus bad faith, I mean, there is definitely something like, I mean, the old Reddit, the Aaron Schwartz Reddit, always had this thing about don't forget the person, which is to say that when you're arguing online, you're not seeing faces, you're not smelling the other person's pheromones or whatever, like you're not seeing their micro expressions. And you have the tendency to become vicious when you're not really just in the room with the other person. Now, the internet facilitates amazing debates, and it's just a matter of just remembering the person. Like, just say a little prayer before you talk to somebody via text or anonymously, that like, ultimately, these conversations are serving real, breathing people in the world with consequences. And so you must always remember that there is a person that's going to go out into the real world with your thoughts in their heads, and just to be kind about it. And it is kind of that thing about like, yes, I understand for a lot of information, it is important to the 90 open Wikipedia pages, which I talk shit about. I mean, I should talk, but just the idea that always has to be matched with like one in-person conversations, not necessarily with somebody that's going to agree with everything that you say. Like it actually has to be conversations and meetings with people that you're afraid of. And when I talk about fear, it is this idea like, yeah, fear can be a signal that the conversation probably should happen. There's a reason that it feels unsafe because it has the potential to actually change something and complete an arc. Now, I had this so a friend of mine is a musician. He cares quite a bit about it. I always ask him about the audio quality. And when I was talking about this thing about like the old versus new music, he did point out that like album-based rock, AOR, so to speak, where the mode of enjoying it was operatic in the sense that like you would listen from an album from side A, track 1 to side B, track whatever, and it was an experience, and the order of the tracks mattered, and there was connective tissue between the different compositions, and you would sit there and you would listen to the whole thing, and you'd experience like 70 minutes or so that you've got on a record, depending on the speed. And Clear Channel and modern radio chop that up. And then even though we've transitioned away from radio onto the internet and Spotify and all that it still has a thing where like they're isolated tracks. So it's not only has the attention span been cut down and the emotions sort of inscribed onto you and really telegraphed to you, but it's also that it's no longer part of a grander vision. And so the one that I was thinking about the most was Dark Side of the Moon, the Pink Floyd album. Now, you'll hear Money, I think, on the radio, or you'll hear Money on, get a good job with full paying your okay, which is also kind of weird too, because it's in an odd time signature. It's in 7/8 time, which is unheard of. Everything is in 4/4. But anyway, so you'll hear that song on the radio, and it's just, I find it really funny because, so the Dark Side of the Moon is, it's this album where, so a bit of biography with Pink Floyd. So it's like you've got Syd Barrett, who went crazy. He took LSD, developed schizophrenia, and he was like an S tier musician. So he was like Lennon, Bowie, and then Syd Barrett was in that lineage of people, but he went crazy. And he actually became reclusive, actually not unlike J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye. And David Gilmour, the guitarist, was brought in to basically just like repeat all of his lines. And so he had no identity. He was just something sort of like a hired session player in Pink Floyd. And they became more and more popular as time went on, and they began to find themselves more as a band. So they had a few hits. And then this album was, and it's interesting because like these are men in their 20s who were just starting to confront the world. Like, so Money is about their temptations as a band to make a bunch of cash and to compromise the art and the pursuit of that, and accounting, and like the British tax service at the time was ironically calling it a service, but was very draconian. I mean, that Beatles song "Taxman" was written about just like they took like an ungodly amount of taxes from British artists, which is why they all lived abroad. But so Money is just like it's the most radio pop friendly because I think that it imposes more and it's also more immediate, and it's got a very the arc of the song is quite predictable and very single track oriented. But what the album actually is it's life. It's this like, so the first song is called "Speak to Me, Breathe," and that is about birth. And there's this beautiful line in it. Leave, but don't leave me. Which I think is referring to like your mother or something. Like it's again, it's all very up in the air. I know that in that song, there's that line, breathe in the air, don't be afraid to care, which was beautiful. But there was an interview with Gilmour much later on, and he's just like, I can't believe we got away with that. I mean, it's just breathe in the, what the fuck were we thinking? It's just like such a corny line. And I'm like, I mean, it's sort of a microcosmic of just never meet your heroes. And then Time, I mean, that gets more radio play too, but that is about time slipping away from you. And at the end of the album, like there's Great Gig in the Sky, which is, so the side A, it starts with a heartbeat, which is life. And then Great Gig in the Sky is essentially the song about death. And it's about death experienced in the middle of your life. And if it's played on an album, it's interesting because there's that, at the end of a record side, there's this track that just goes and it just repeats endlessly as a way to tell you to turn the record player over. So starts in a heartbeat, ends in a heartbeat, so to speak. And with Great Gig in the Sky too, like, so it's just her wailing. And it was really funny because the woman that recorded it, she thought that she completely whiffed it, and she was like ashamed of herself, and everyone was just like awestruck by it. And I realized that like it's just wailing the whole song, which is just like the tears of experiencing death. And it's very interesting how they treated death wordlessly. It's just an emotion. Us and Them, like, so Roger Waters, I mean, he's very famous for being consistently sort of anti-war in general. And his father died in World War II. And Us and Them is actually like literally the song about his father dying in World War II. And yet, here we are taking like this one song out of the album and just playing it ad nauseum, where we're ignoring the man talking about his father's death in the context of this whole album. It's a bit of a tragedy. So, at least listen to the thing all the way through at least once. And, it's interesting too, like, the album doesn't actually end on death. It ends on insanity, like which is seemingly senility, I think, is what they're getting into. And, asking my friend, like, so what is the dark side of the moon, really? Like, what exactly are they trying to communicate with that? Now, for me, the dark side of the moon, I think about the moon as such. And one of the things that really struck me, like, when I look at the moon at night, I keep thinking about, like, what did other people think when they looked up at this, right? Because even before man was man, the moon was up there and it was doing its thing. And it was like this two-dimensional thing, and they would know that it would wax and wane. And I know that the full moon is very interesting because, so we potentially only intuited this, but the reason that everybody goes crazy alongside a full moon is because the ocean's tides, like, you would always have the lowest tide when there was a full moon. And then you also had sunlight reflecting off the moon, activating your photoganglion system and causing you to be more wakeful. So it was a combination of food availability and having more energy at nighttime. And you would go and you would get all the creepy crawlies and mollusks and crustaceans and stuff that were left over in the tide pools. You do this for millions of years. Eventually, people have this training for what a full moon ought to be. And so it's very significant, and we just puzzled at it. And what I find interesting is that, so this album was recorded 1962, so we landed on the moon like 3 years prior. And although we had the spherical model of the solar system, where we knew the moon was a sphere by just the way that it would form and all that stuff, But we actually get up there and we don't land on the dark side of the moon because we're tidally locked. So there is one side of the moon that is always in darkness. And so we didn't really observe it until I think the 80s or something like that, or even the 2000s. But the point was that there's always like this mysterious shadow to the brilliant, beautiful blue marble below. And the more that we learned about the moon, like first we learned it was dimensional, not two-dimensional. It was locked in the firmament. And then we when we learned about the fact that it was a sphere and was orbiting us and all this, that it was not really known as to whether or not the moon was a collection of extrastellar bodies or whatever, like meteors and comets and stuff clumping together, or like a protoplanet that got taken into our orbit. And it was only when we did isotope analysis and stellar geology that we learned like it's actually a piece of Earth that got knocked loose. So like a huge protoplanet hit the Earth, and then like everything was just like a spinning disk of dust and rock, and then it turns into the moon, and then it turns into Earth. So in this weird way, like the moon is actually us, and the Earth is us. Like it's this permanent representation of the shadow. And so the dark side of the moon is essentially, it is sort of like, I mean, and he and I reached this conclusion that it's the Jungian shadow. It is the thing that you have to deal with and integrate, but at the same time, it's also the mystery of life. The dark side of the moon is just what you haven't approached and what you haven't built yet. And, at the end, like, so the last track is called Eclipse. And the way that it's essentially describing life, like it's describing the whole process, because you've got birth and you've got, on the run and time, which is like chasing commerce and money and death and all this. And then eventually we end on insanity and senility and presumably death. And it's funny, like between all of these songs, they have these interviews with people where they're asked like really probing questions about themselves. Like, when was the last time that you got really angry? And the one that my friend always remembers is at the very beginning of Speak to Me. It's just like, I've been mad for fucking years, absolutely years. I've always been mad. And I think Linda McCartney's actually on there too. I forget what she's talking about. I think it's on Great Gig in the Sky, where she's like, talking about death. Actually, I don't know if I even have that. I remember my choral instructor used to say that don't shuffle your papers because they're the highest frequency thing in this room. And I was always tempted to say, actually, it's the fluorescent light ballasts that have the highest oscillation. Oh, yeah, because there's no... Okay. Yeah. So one of the interviews on the Great Gig in the Sky, and I'm not frightened of dying. Anytime will do. I don't mind. Why should I be frightened of dying? There's no reason for it. You got to go sometimes. And I think that it was Linda McCartney that said, I never said I was frightened of dying. But so Eclipse, that this is like the crescendo end of the album, and it's the way that life is described. It's like all that you touch, all that you see, all that you taste, all that you feel. And then here comes the tension, where like all that you love and all that you hate, all you distrust, all you save, all that you give, all that you... And I love this line, and I quote it a lot. All that you buy, beg, borrow, or steal. All you create and all you destroy. All that you do and all that you say. All that you eat and everyone you meet. All that you slight and everyone you fight. All that is now and all that is gone. All that's to come. And everything under the sun is in tune by the sun, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And there it is, like that's the tension between mystery and knowing and life and surprise. And then it ends on I think the roadie saying, like in one of the interviews, it's like, there is no dark side of the moon really. In fact, as a matter of fact, it's all dark. And I mean, you can spend a long time just thinking about that and like, what the hell does that actually mean? It's all dark. I would say that, like, I suppose that is the mystery in other people too. It's this, you're always going to encounter somebody else's shadow. And when I think back to life experience, I just think it's all just a matter of what you actually what you actually learn from it. Like I this is kind of my own phrase for libertarianism or whatever. It's just like if you're conservative before you're 30, you have no heart, and if you're liberal after 30, you have no brain. But I always just tended to think of like, well, yeah, but if you're a libertarian, it just means you've been paying attention. And so it's all about what you're actually paying attention to. If you're giving the world and its ideas and the information like a good faith reading, to have as little of your trauma and as little of your defensive posture projected onto the world. And that's why I mean I've said before that like liberty and freedom is a psychiatric position rather than a political one, because that's what I feel that it is. It's like I didn't decide that I wanted to care about freedom. It was just revealed to me the more that I tried to figure things out. Like, again, there is that anxious attachment or something, or that preemptive psychologizing where I needed to know everything as deeply as possible. Because nobody thinks about money. Nobody thinks about the structure of their government. Nobody thinks outside the Overton window. And I've always had to bend the frame out of a fear of being overtaken and of being overwritten and being taken advantage of. And understanding just like how fragile life can be. Because I mean, I've known people that have died, and the best way that I can honor their memory is just whenever I think about them and whenever I have the fear of what happens to them and what has happened to them. And, you know, like when you experience death as a kid, like I remember my preschool teacher died, and it's very odd how you experience death as a kid, because like, you know, one day she's alive, and then she's got like a bandana phase during the chemotherapy, and then she's just gone. And the memories that I have of that, like the Cornell casserole plates, because all the ladies in the neighborhood would sort of like the widowed father and the two boys, they would just bring like this endless barrage of like casseroles covered in aluminum foil. And you know, that's what I associate with death, is those Cornell casserole dishes. But it's just when you're thinking about like whenever you get this reminder of the finitude of life, it is not a call to hide from it or to cut yourself off from other people so that you never feel their loss. I mean, it is actually more of a call to just take advantage of what you have, and you know, not only just enjoy, not only to just like move in the world, but it's also to pay attention to the world and to experience everything as deeply as possible. Because, you know, if you listen to music the way that I'm listening to music, and if you appreciate art and movies the way that I and others appreciate them, it's because there's this beautiful thing in front of you. And the more that you can look into it, and the deeper and the more intertwining features of it. Like if you understand music and you understand film and cinematography, you can enjoy the movie, and then you can enjoy the production, and you can enjoy the talent and the writing and everything. And I mean, I suppose art is your first introduction to this, but that is just the entire thing about the world, is like paying attention. And to just go as deep as you can possibly go into paying attention. Now, I think that the art that is most beautiful is people and human beings and their consciousness. That is the thing that you must appreciate the deepest, because not only is it a constantly moving and evolving process, and not only an evolving process in and of themselves, but it's one that changes you. I mean, like to not... The ultimate rejoinder to being asked if I feel like I should be the one in charge of the system, I should be the one behind the panopticon, it is just the fact that I don't feel that I'm alive unless I'm being changed by people. You know, like there's always this potential that a 2-minute conversation changes the course of your life. And it's important to always be open to that, and to not only be open to it, but understand what it demands of you, and to be ready for it. And it's just this idea that to appreciate the art of humanity, you simply just have to know it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But it's a vulnerable process on either side. And it's just not resisting that vulnerability while still having some ability to keep your wits about you. Because that is ultimately the goal of this, is just to feel life as deeply as possible, but not be overtaken by anything that can cause distance from it. That is the tension. It's just like this trust, but also this withholding and back and forth and back and forth. And so the tension never ends, and life is never going to be resolved because the resolution is literally death. So, I mean, all that I can really say is I'll meet you on the dark side of the moon if and when we do.